23:05 hours, March 27th, 1945. Above the black cold waters separating Honshu and Kyushu, the night air is thin at 5,000 feet. Captain Robert Salzar of the 505th Bomb Group grips the yoke of his B-29 Superfortress, the engines of the city of Tinian, maintaining a steady, powerful drone that vibrates through the fuselage and into his bones. Below, the Shimonoseki Strait is a dark, invisible ribbon, a place known only by radar return and navigators' dead reckoning. This altitude feels wrong. It is a suicidal height for a heavy bomber, a machine designed and built to operate in the thin, cold safety of the stratosphere, far above the effective range of most anti-aircraft artillery. But tonight their mission is not high-altitude precision bombing, it is something else, something new and deeply unsettling. The bomb bay doors are open, not to rain down incendiaries on a sleeping city, but to release a dozen silent cylindrical shapes into the darkness. Each one is a Mark 25 naval mine, a 1,000-pound package of high explosive and sophisticated magnetic triggers, now dangling from a parachute, drifting gently down toward the unseen shipping channel. The stakes are absolute. To sow a new kind of destruction in Japan's most vital artery, a waterway that is the very lifeblood of its war machine. This single aircraft is just one of nearly 100 others from the 313th Bombardment Wing, flying similar lonely, low-level paths this night. Their target not a factory or a rail yard, but the water itself. The war in the Pacific had reached a terminal phase. By the spring of 1945, the Empire of Japan was an island fortress under siege, not by land, but by sea and air. The vast territories it had conquered were gone. Its powerful carrier fleets rested at the bottom of the Pacific, and its industrial cities were being systematically erased by fire. The nation's survival depended entirely on what its remaining merchant ships could carry through a tightening cordon of American power. At the heart of this fragile logistical network lay the Shimonoseki Strait, a narrow, treacherous passage connecting the Sea of Japan with the Inland Sea. This was Japan's aorta. Through this channel flowed nearly all the raw materials from the Asian mainland, coal from Manchuria, iron ore from Korea, rubber and oil from the dwindling southern territories, as well as the food needed to feed its population. Every day, more than 1.5 million tons of shipping passed through these waters, a constant, vital stream of sustenance for the factories of Osaka, Kobe, and Hiroshima. To cut this artery would be to induce a fatal stroke in the Japanese war economy. The United States military was already applying immense pressure. The submarine campaign, relentless and devastating, had decimated Japan's long-range merchant marine on the open oceans. On the home islands themselves, the recent shift to low-altitude incendiary bombing, led by the pragmatic and ruthless Major General Curtis LeMay of the 21st Bomber Command, was turning Japan's wood and paper cities into infernos. Yet the Shimonoseki Strait and the Inland Sea remained a relative sanctuary, a protected internal highway where coastal shipping could move with a degree of safety. Bombing the port facilities at either end of the strait was an option, but it was costly in terms of aircraft and crews, and damage could often be repaired. A new strategy was needed, one that could paralyze this internal traffic with surgical efficiency and minimal risk. A plan that would not just destroy the ships, but make the water itself hostile territory. The decision to employ the nation's most advanced strategic bomber in the role of a naval mine layer was a radical departure from established doctrine. Air power theorists had long envisioned bombers striking at the heart of an enemy's industrial capacity, but using them to impose a naval blockade was a novel and largely untested concept. The genesis of this shift came from a series of high-level assessments concluding that conventional bombing was not achieving its primary objective fast enough. High-altitude precision bombing with the B-29 had proven frustratingly inaccurate due to the formidable jet stream winds over Japan. The subsequent firebombing raids were terrifyingly effective at dehousing the population and destroying cottage industries, but Japan's core heavy industries and the shipping that fed them were proving resilient. Naval minelaying was traditionally the work of destroyers, specialized minelaying vessels, or submarines, platforms that were slow, conspicuous, and highly vulnerable when operating in heavily defended enemy waters like the Shimonoseki Strait. An attempt by the U.S. Navy to lay mines with submarines in the area had met with limited success and significant risk. The B-29 Superfortress offered a revolutionary alternative. It possessed the range to fly from the newly captured Marianas Islands, the payload capacity to carry a significant number of mines, and the speed to make the transit quickly under the cover of darkness. Most importantly, it could deliver its payload from the air, avoiding enemy naval patrols and coastal defenses in a way no surface ship ever could. The plan was codenamed Operation Starvation. Its objective was brutally simple: to close Japan's key waterways to all shipping, starving its industries of raw materials and its people of food. The operation was assigned to General LeMay's 21st Bomber Command, specifically the 313th Bombardment Wing stationed on Tinian. The rationale was one of cold, hard efficiency. Post-mission analysis suggested that a single B-29 laying a field of mines could, over time, sink or damage more tonnage than a B-29, dropping a conventional bomb load on a shipyard. The mines worked around the clock, passively, waiting for their victims. They created a psychological weapon of immense power, turning every voyage into a gamble. A successful mining campaign would force the Japanese to divert enormous resources, ships, fuel, and trained personnel, to the incredibly dangerous and time-consuming task of minesweeping, further straining their already shattered economy. It was a strategy of indirect warfare, of paralysis rather than obliteration, and it would leverage America's technological superiority in a new and decisive way. The instrument for this new form of warfare was the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber of its time. With a range of over 3,200 nautical miles and a service ceiling above 30,000 feet, it was an engineering marvel. It featured a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, and an analog computer for bomb sighting. For Operation Starvation, however, its most critical feature was its cavernous bomb bay, capable of holding up to 20,000 pounds of ordnance. Ground crews on Tinian worked to adapt these aircraft for their new role. The standard bomb shackles were modified to accommodate the bulky, cylindrical shapes of naval mines. The primary weapons were the Mark 25, a 2,000-pound mine, and the Mark 26, a lighter 1,000-pound variant. These were not simple contact mines from the First World War. They were sophisticated influence mines designed to rest on the seabed and detonate without any physical contact with a ship. The Mark 25 could be fitted with a magnetic trigger, responding to the metallic mass of a ship passing overhead, or an acoustic trigger, listening for the specific sound signature of a vessel's propellers. To make them even more difficult to counter, they were equipped with ship counters, which would allow a set number of vessels to pass safely before arming, and delayed arming mechanisms which made the minefields unpredictable and constantly evolving. The crews of the 313th Wing required a completely new type of training. These were men who had honed their skills in the rigid formations of high-altitude flight, depending on height for safety. Now, they were instructed to fly individual sorties at night at altitudes between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, directly into the teeth of Japanese coastal defenses. Navigators had to become experts in identifying coastal features by radar to ensure precise mine placement in narrow channels. Pilots had to learn to handle the massive four-engine bomber at low altitudes where the air was thicker and the controls felt heavier. The psychological shift was immense. Instead of the detached, almost abstract process of dropping bombs from 6 miles up, they would be close enough to see the muzzle flashes of the guns firing at them. Their survival depended on speed, darkness, and the element of complete surprise. They were transforming a strategic weapon into a tactical tool for a mission that felt more like a torpedo run than a bombing raid. The first mission of Operation Starvation took place on the night of March 27, 1945. 92 B-29s of the 313th Wing took off from Tinian, each carrying a payload of 7 2,000-pound or 12 1,000-pound mines. Their target was the western entrance to the Shimonoseki Strait, the narrowest and most heavily trafficked section. Flying as individual aircraft rather than in a concentrated bomber stream, they arrived over the target area staggered throughout the late night and early morning hours. For pilots like Captain Salzar, the experience was a jarring mix of high tension and eerie quiet. The long flight from the Marianas was a familiar routine, but the descent over the Japanese coast was new. Instead of climbing to the stratosphere, they dropped down, leveling off at an altitude that left them naked to searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. From his cockpit, Salzar could see the lights of the cities of Shimonoseki on Honshu and Moji on Kyushu. Then the searchlights snapped on, brilliant white fingers probing the darkness. Flak began to burst around them, the ugly black puffs of smoke illuminated by their own explosions. The crews, accustomed to seeing these bursts far below them, now saw them at their own altitude, close enough to hear the shrapnel patter against the aluminum skin of the aircraft. The bombardier, using radar to pinpoint the channel, would call out the release point. With the bomb bay doors open, the aircraft would lurch slightly as thousands of pounds of mines fell away into the night, their parachutes blossoming to slow their descent and ensure a soft entry into the water. In a matter of seconds, it was over. The pilot would push the throttles forward, climbing away into the safety of the higher altitudes for the long flight home. Behind them, they left no fire, no smoke, just a series of invisible threats settling silently onto the seabed of Japan's most important waterway. The first indication for the Japanese that something had changed came the next morning. A small coastal freighter, the Dainichi Maru, attempting to enter the strait, suddenly vanished in a tremendous explosion. Then another, a fishing vessel, was blown apart. The initial reports were confused, attributing the losses to submarines or stray bombs. But as more ships detonated in the same small area, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The strait had been mined, and on a massive scale. The Japanese response was one of frantic urgency. The Imperial Japanese Navy's minesweeping force was already stretched thin, protecting major naval bases and harbors. They were ill-equipped to deal with this new threat. Their inventory consisted mainly of older vessels designed to sweep for traditional anchored mines with mechanical cutting cables. They had very little effective equipment for neutralizing sophisticated magnetic or acoustic influence mines. Desperate, the Naval Command requisitioned hundreds of steel-hulled fishing trawlers and other small civilian vessels, fitting them with rudimentary magnetic sweeps. These crews, mostly civilian fishermen with minimal training, were sent into the minefields on what were effectively suicide missions. Their ships were often just as susceptible to the magnetic triggers as the cargo vessels they were trying to protect. The strain on resources was immediate and catastrophic. Minesweeping consumed vast quantities of fuel, a commodity that was already more precious than gold in Japan. It diverted skilled sailors and technicians from other critical duties. The psychological toll was equally severe. Japanese mariners, who had long considered the inland sea a safe haven, now faced an unseen and unpredictable enemy. Every transit of the strait, a passage they had made hundreds of times, was now a life-or-death gamble. A sailor named Masao Kobayashi, a mate on a coal freighter, later described the feeling. "We used to fear the American submarines in the open sea, but in the strait we feared the water itself. You never knew. The ship ahead of you could pass, and then for you the sea would explode." The impact on shipping was swift and devastating. Within the first week of Operation Starvation, traffic through the Shimonoseki Strait dropped by more than 75%. Ships began to back up at anchorages, waiting for channels to be declared clear, a process that could take days. Insurance rates for cargo skyrocketed. The flow of coal from Kyushu to the steel mills of Honshu slowed to a trickle. The Japanese High Command, realizing the existential threat, declared the mining of the strait a national crisis. They attempted to reroute shipping to less efficient rail lines, but the Japanese railway system was already overloaded and itself a primary target for American fighter bombers. Some larger vessels were diverted to ports on the Sea of Japan, where their cargo had to be offloaded and transported overland, a slow and inefficient process. The numbers, compiled in after-action analysis, tell a stark story. Before the campaign began, the strait handled over 1 million tons of shipping a month. By May, that figure had fallen below 200,000 tons. After a second series of mining missions in early May that replenished and expanded the minefields, the strait was virtually closed. For days at a time, not a single large ship could pass through. The economic effect was immediate. Steel production, which depended on a constant supply of coking coal, plummeted. Food shortages in the major cities, already severe, grew worse as shipments of rice and other staples from the mainland were cut off. The mines were not just sinking ships. They were methodically dismembering the entire Japanese war economy. The paralysis was nearly total. The mines acted as a self-enforcing blockade, requiring no continued American presence to be effective. The B-29s simply had to return every few weeks to refresh the minefields, sewing new devices with different trigger settings to keep the Japanese minesweepers off balance. The effectiveness of Operation Starvation, when measured against its cost, was nothing short of astounding. The entire aerial mining campaign involved just over 1,500 sorties flown by a single bomb wing. In the course of these missions, the 313th Wing dropped 12,135 mines in the Shimonoseki Strait and other key harbors like Kobe, Osaka, and Tokyo Bay. These mines sank or damaged 670 Japanese ships, totaling more than 1.25 million tons. This figure represented a significant portion of Japan's entire remaining merchant fleet. By comparison, the campaign of high-altitude bombing against Japanese industrial targets involved tens of thousands of sorties, consumed vastly more fuel and munitions, and resulted in higher aircraft losses. While the firebombing of cities had a profound impact on morale and light industry, the mining campaign struck directly at the logistical foundation of Japan's ability to wage war. It accomplished with remarkable efficiency what the far larger and more resource-intensive bombing campaigns had struggled to achieve: the complete strangulation of the Japanese economy. The cost to the Americans was minimal. Over the entire 5-month duration of Operation Starvation, only 15 B-29s were lost during mining missions. This represented a loss rate of less than 1%, far lower than the rates experienced during both high-altitude and low-altitude incendiary bombing raids over major cities. From a purely strategic calculus, aerial minelaying was the most cost-effective and impactful operation carried out by the B-29s during the entire war. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, would later state that the mining campaign had an effect on Japan's ability to continue the war that was out of all proportion to the effort expended. The human stories on both sides of this silent underwater war reveal the unique pressures of the campaign. For the B-29 crews, the missions were nerve-wracking departures from their normal routine. Lieutenant Jack Watson, a navigator on one of the missions, recalled the intense focus required. "You couldn't be off by a few hundred yards. Drop it in water too deep, it's useless. Too shallow, the ships won't pass over it. You had the lives of your crew in your hands, and you're staring at a fuzzy green radar screen, trying to find a channel in the dark with people shooting at you from below." The fear was different from high-altitude missions. There was an intimacy to the danger, a feeling of being hunted at low level that was profoundly unnerving. They knew that a single well-aimed 40mm shell could cripple an engine and send their massive aircraft cartwheeling into the sea. On the Japanese side, the experience was one of creeping dread and helplessness. For a merchant sailor like Kenji Tanaka on a small transport ship carrying supplies, the invisible threat fundamentally changed his relationship with the sea. Before, the dangers were visible: an enemy aircraft, the periscope of a submarine. Now the danger was the water itself. He recounted watching a larger ship, the Kikumaru, pass through a supposedly swept channel just a few hundred yards ahead of his own vessel. Without warning, an enormous column of water and black smoke erupted from beneath its hull. The ship broke in two, its bow and stern rising toward the sky before slipping beneath the waves in less than a minute. There were few survivors. Tanaka's ship was ordered to reverse course immediately. The channel was no longer safe. This feeling of powerlessness, the knowledge that a perfectly functioning ship could be destroyed at any random moment by an unseen force, had a deeply corrosive effect on the morale of the Japanese merchant marine, a group of men already exhausted by years of war. The long-term legacy of Operation Starvation extended far beyond the shores of Japan. It was one of the most decisive yet least celebrated campaigns of the Second World War. By the time of Japan's surrender in August 1945, the nation's internal shipping network was completely paralyzed. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the aerial mining campaign was a primary factor in the collapse of the Japanese economy, ranking its impact on par with the direct bombing of industries and the submarine blockade of overseas shipping. Japanese leaders, including members of the wartime cabinet, confirmed in interrogations that the inability to transport coal and food internally had created a situation that was becoming unsustainable by the summer of 1945, independent of the atomic bombs. The operation served as a powerful proof of concept for a new type of warfare. It demonstrated conclusively that a strategic air force could be used to impose a naval blockade with devastating effect, a role previously exclusive to naval power. This lesson reshaped post-war military doctrine, influencing the development of air-delivered naval weapons and solidifying the role of air power in maritime control. The quiet, methodical work of the 313th Bombardment Wing, dropping silent weapons into the dark water, had succeeded in closing the steel fist of blockade around Japan, accelerating the end of the war and establishing a new and powerful chapter in the history of aerial warfare.